When my daughter got married, I never mentioned the $30 million beachfront properties my late husband left me. Good thing I stayed quiet, because a month later her new husband showed up with a lawyer demanding his share. But he had no idea I already knew who he really was. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me backtrack to how this mess started. 2 years ago, my husband Thomas died of a heart attack, leaving me with a real estate empire along the California coast. Properties in Malibu, Carmel, Monterey, places so beautiful they take your breath away. Sarah had always been Daddy's girl, so when she brought Brad Mitchell home last Christmas, I kept my mouth shut about the inheritance. Call it mother's intuition, but something about that man's smile reminded me of a shark. Sarah was glowing with happiness, planning a beach wedding for June. "Mom, Brad's been through so much," she'd say, stroking his hand across my dining table. "His first wife died in that terrible car accident. He's finally ready to love again." I'd nod and pour more wine, watching this supposed grieving widower calculate the value of my crystal chandelier. Oh, I knew exactly who Brad Mitchell was. The question was whether my daughter would figure it out before it was too late. The wedding was beautiful. Sarah looked radiant in her grandmother's dress, and Brad played the devoted groom perfectly. During his vows, he promised to protect and cherish her forever. I dabbed my eyes with my handkerchief, not from joy, but from the effort it took not to stand up and tell everyone what I'd discovered about my new son-in-law's past. 3 weeks later, Brad knocked on my door with a briefcase and a man in an expensive suit. "Margaret," Brad said, his voice honey-smooth, "this is Robert Kane, my attorney. We need to discuss your legal obligations." I invited them into my living room, served coffee in my best china, and waited. These two had no idea they were walking into the spider's web. "As Sarah's husband," Brad began, "I'm entitled to understand our family's financial position. California is a community property state, which means absolutely nothing regarding my inheritance," I interrupted. "The properties were left to me alone, not to Sarah." Kane cleared his throat. "Mrs. Sullivan, while technically correct, we believe there are grounds for a more equitable arrangement." He opened his briefcase with practiced precision. "Your daughter's marriage creates certain expectations." I sipped my coffee calmly. "What kind of expectations?" "Financial security for their future family," Brad said. "Sarah and I want children. We need to know those children will be provided for." The audacity was breathtaking. This man had been married to my daughter for exactly 28 days, and he was already making claims on property worth $30 million. But I kept my expression neutral. "I see. And what exactly are you proposing?" Kane slid a document across my coffee table. "A family trust arrangement. You'd transfer the properties into a trust, maintaining control during your lifetime, but ensuring smooth succession to Sarah and Brad." I picked up the papers, scanning them with the careful attention of someone who'd spent 40 years married to a real estate developer. Hidden in the legal language was a clause that would give Brad power of attorney if I became incapacitated. "This is quite comprehensive," I said. "I'll need time to review it with my attorney." Brad's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Of course. But Margaret, family should trust family. These properties represent Sarah's inheritance too. Shouldn't she have some security?" That's when I knew for certain. This wasn't about Sarah or future grandchildren. This was about Brad Mitchell getting his hands on $30 million worth of prime California real estate. What he didn't know was that I'd already had him investigated. What he really didn't know was that his first wife hadn't died in any car accident. The private investigator I'd hired 6 months ago had been thorough. Frank Romano didn't come cheap, but when your only child falls for a man whose story doesn't add up, you pay what it takes. Brad Mitchell's real name is Brandon Michelson, Frank had told me in his cluttered office downtown. He's got quite a resume. 3 previous marriages, all to wealthy widows. First wife supposedly died in a car crash, except there's no death certificate. She disappeared after filing for divorce and claiming he'd stolen from her business accounts. The file was thick with photocopies, credit card fraud, embezzlement charges that were mysteriously dropped, and a pattern of targeting vulnerable women with assets. He changes his name every few years, moves to a new state, reinvents himself. Your daughter isn't his first mark, Mrs. Sullivan, and she won't be his last unless someone stops him. Sitting in my living room now, watching Brad perform his concerned husband routine, I felt sick thinking about what he had planned for Sarah. But I also felt something else. The cold satisfaction of knowing I held all the cards. "You know what?" I said, setting down my coffee cup. "I think this trust idea has merit, but I'd like to propose some modifications." Both men leaned forward eagerly. "First, I want a complete financial disclosure from both of you. Assets, debts, income history for the past 5 years. If we're going to be family partners, everything should be transparent." I watched Brad's face carefully. A muscle twitched near his left eye. "That seems invasive," he said. "I mean, what does my previous financial history have to do with your estate planning?" "Everything," I replied smoothly. "I need to understand what kind of financial management skills you bring to the table. After all, you'll potentially be overseeing assets worth $30 million. Kane jumped in. "Mrs. Sullivan, while we appreciate your thoroughness, Mr. Mitchell's personal finances are hardly relevant to—" "They're completely relevant," I interrupted. "I won't put my life's work into a trust managed by someone whose financial history I don't understand. That would be irresponsible." The room fell silent. I could practically hear the wheels turning in Brad's head. He couldn't provide a clean financial history because Brandon Michelson's history was anything but clean. "I think we need to table this discussion," Brad said finally. "Margaret, you're obviously feeling overwhelmed by such a big decision. Why don't you take a few weeks to think it over?" "Oh, I'm not overwhelmed at all," I said cheerfully. "In fact, I'm energized. This is the most interested anyone's been in my financial affairs since Thomas died." I stood up, signaling the meeting was over. "I'll have my attorney draw up some preliminary questions for that financial disclosure. Nothing too invasive, just standard due diligence. You understand?" After they left, I poured myself a generous glass of wine and called Frank Romano. "They took the bait," I told him. "Brad's going to run now. He can't risk a financial background check. What about your daughter?" I stared out my window at the ocean, watching waves crash against the rocks below. "Sarah's going to be devastated, but better heartbroken than dead." 3 days later, Sarah called me crying. "Mom, Brad left. He said he needed space to think about our future. He took all his clothes and his car and just disappeared." I drove to her apartment immediately, finding her curled up on the couch in her pajamas, clutching a tissue box. "I don't understand," she sobbed. "Everything was perfect. We were so happy. Why would he leave without even talking to me?" I sat beside her, stroking her hair like I used to when she was little and had nightmares. "Sometimes people aren't who we think they are, sweetheart. But he loved me. I know he loved me. He said I was the best thing that ever happened to him." "I'm sure you were," I said gently. "But sometimes people love the idea of someone more than they love the actual person." Sarah pulled back, studying my face. "You know something, don't you? About Brad?" This was the moment I'd been dreading. How do you tell your daughter that her husband is a criminal who married her for money? How do you explain that you've been investigating the man she loved? "I hired a private investigator," I admitted. "Something about Brad bothered me from the beginning. I needed to know more about his background." Sarah's eyes widened. "Mom, how could you? That's such a violation of privacy." "Sarah, Brad's real name is Brandon Michelson. He's been married 3 times before, always to women with money. His first wife didn't die in a car accident. She disappeared after accusing him of theft." But even as I spoke, I could see Sarah shutting down, refusing to accept what I was telling her. "I can't believe you did this," she whispered. "I can't believe you drove away the man I love with your paranoid suspicions." That's when I realized the worst part of this whole situation. Even with proof of Brad's criminal past, Sarah would rather blame me than face the truth about her husband. 3 weeks of silence. 3 weeks of my daughter refusing to speak to me because I'd dared to investigate the man who'd abandoned her. I'd call, get voicemail. I'd text, get nothing. I'd drive by her apartment, see her car in the parking lot, but she wouldn't answer the door. The worst part wasn't the silent treatment. It was knowing Brad was still out there, probably already targeting his next victim. Frank Romano had tracked him as far as Phoenix before losing the trail. "He's good at disappearing," Frank had told me. "Give him 6 months to establish a new identity, and he'll surface in another city with another story." I was having my morning coffee when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Sarah standing on my porch, but she didn't look like my daughter. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow, and she'd lost at least 15 pounds. Sarah! I opened the door immediately. Sweetheart, come in. She walked past me like a ghost, settling onto my couch in the exact spot where Brad had made his demands a month earlier. I need to know everything, she said without preamble. About Brad. About what you found out. My heart broke seeing her like this. Honey, are you sure you want to— Everything, Mom. I need to understand what I married. I went to my study and retrieved Frank's file. For the next 2 hours, I walked Sarah through Brandon Michelson's criminal history, the fake death certificate he'd created for his first wife, the elderly woman in Oregon who'd lost her retirement savings to his investment scheme, the Phoenix socialite who'd nearly died from poisoning before her children intervened. He was escalating, I explained gently. Each marriage, the stakes got higher. The methods got more dangerous. Sarah stared at the photographs Frank had taken. Brad entering hotels with other women, Brad at ATMs withdrawing cash from accounts that didn't belong to him, Brad meeting with known criminals in Las Vegas. The man I married doesn't exist, she whispered. No, sweetheart, he doesn't. But I felt so connected to him, so understood. How could someone fake that level of intimacy? I sat beside her, choosing my words carefully. Because that's his skill. He studies women, learns what they need to hear, becomes exactly what they're looking for. You weren't naive, Sarah. You were targeted by a professional. I told him about Dad's properties, she said suddenly, her voice barely audible. About the inheritance. I thought we were sharing our lives with each other. When did you tell him? Our third date. He was talking about his dreams of living by the ocean, and I mentioned that Mom owned some beautiful beachfront properties. I thought I was being romantic, sharing family history. The pieces clicked together. Brad hadn't fallen in love with Sarah and then discovered her family's wealth. He'd identified her as a target from the beginning. Somehow, he'd known about Thomas's real estate empire before he'd even asked Sarah out. Sarah, where did you meet Brad? At the coffee shop near my office. He was there every morning, reading the financial section. We started chatting about investments and real estate trends. Did he approach you? Or did you approach him? She thought for a moment. He did. He complimented my portfolio analysis. I was grading papers for my economics class. Said he was impressed by a woman who understood market dynamics. Frank Romano had mentioned that Brad typically researched his targets extensively before making contact. If Sarah was grading economics papers in public, he would have known she worked in academia. From there, it would be easy enough to learn about her family connections. He played a very long game with you, I said. This wasn't accidental, Sarah. He knew exactly who you were before he bought you that first cup of coffee. Sarah broke down then. Not the gentle tears she'd shed over his abandonment, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from her soul. I'm so stupid, she gasped between sobs. So incredibly stupid. You're not stupid, you're human. And you fell in love with someone who doesn't exist. When she finally stopped crying, Sarah looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Something hard and determined had replaced the devastation in her eyes. Mom, she said quietly, I want him to pay for this. Not just for what he did to me, but for what he's done to other women, for what he might do to the next woman. Honey, the police have been looking for Brandon Michelson for years. If they haven't caught him yet, but we know something they don't know, Sarah interrupted. We know he's going to come back. What makes you think that? Sarah pulled out her phone and showed me a text message that had arrived that morning. Sarah, I've made a terrible mistake. I love you more than my own life. I'm getting help for my commitment issues. Please give me another chance. I'll explain everything. Brad. I stared at the message, then at my daughter's face. You think this is part of some larger plan? I know it is. He didn't get what he came for. Mom, he didn't get access to the properties. Men like Brad don't just walk away from $30 million. She was right, and suddenly, I understood what my daughter was proposing. You want to set a trap. Sarah nodded slowly. I want to give him exactly what he thinks he wants. And then I want to destroy him. Absolutely not. Frank Romano shook his head emphatically. What you're suggesting is incredibly dangerous. This man has potentially killed before. Sarah and I sat in Frank's office, laying out our plan to lure Brad back and gather enough evidence to have him arrested. I had to admit, it sounded insane when we said it out loud. But it could work, Sarah insisted. He thinks I'm heartbroken and desperate. If I respond to his text saying I forgive him, that I want him back, he'll return. And then what? Frank asked. He comes back, you reconcile, and hope he confesses to being a serial killer? Real life doesn't work like television, ladies. I leaned forward. Frank, you said the FBI has been tracking Brandon Michelson for years. What would they need to finally arrest him? Evidence of an ongoing crime. They can't prosecute him for suspected murders without bodies. They can't charge him for financial fraud without victims willing to testify. Most of his previous marks are either dead or too embarrassed to come forward. But if he attempted to defraud me? I asked. If we documented him trying to gain illegal access to my assets? Frank considered this. That might work, but the risk is worth it, Sarah interrupted. Every day he's free, he's hunting for another victim. Another woman is going to go through what I went through, except she might not survive it. Frank studied my daughter with new respect. You've changed, Sarah. A month ago, you were defending this man. Now, you want to put him in prison. A month ago, I thought I knew who he was. Now I know what he is. Sarah's voice was steel. And I want him stopped. We spent the next hour planning our strategy. Sarah would respond to Brad's text, expressing forgiveness and desperate longing for his return. She'd tell him I felt terrible about driving him away and wanted to make amends by moving forward with the trust arrangement. I would play the part of a guilt-ridden mother eager to restore family harmony. The key, Frank explained, is getting him to commit fraud in writing or on recording. We need documented proof of criminal intent. What about hidden cameras, I suggested? Not admissible without consent in California, but if Sarah wears a wire and she's a willing participant in the recording, that evidence could be used. Sarah nodded immediately. I'll do it. Sarah, we need to discuss what you're really signing up for, Frank warned. You'll have to convince a sociopath that you still love him. You'll have to let him touch you, kiss you, manipulate you, all while knowing what he's done to other women. Are you prepared for that psychological toll? My daughter was quiet for a long moment, staring out Frank's window at the city below. Mom, she said finally, tell me about Dad's first development project, the one that almost bankrupted him. I was confused by the subject change, but I answered. The Phoenix Strip Mall. He invested everything we had, and the contractor disappeared with the money. We lost our house, had to move in with Grandma for 6 months. But he rebuilt, Sarah said. He didn't give up. He found another way. It took him 5 years to recover financially. Sarah turned back to us. Dad always said that failure only defeats you if you let it define you. Well, I'm not letting Brad Mitchell define me. I'm going to define myself by how I respond to what he did. Frank sighed. All right, but we do this my way, with proper backup and safety protocols. If at any point this situation feels dangerous, we abort the operation. Sarah texted Brad that evening. I've been miserable without you. Can we talk? I think Mom wants to apologize too. His response came within minutes. I knew you'd understand. I love you so much. I'll be home tomorrow. Home. After everything he'd done, after abandoning her without explanation, he still considered her apartment home. The arrogance was breathtaking. That night, Sarah stayed at my house. We sat up until dawn, going over every detail of our plan. Frank had arranged for unmarked surveillance outside Sarah's apartment. Sarah would wear a wire during all interactions with Brad. I would participate in one recorded meeting where Brad would hopefully incriminate himself by detailing his plans for the trust arrangement. Are you sure about this, sweetheart? I asked as we watched the sunrise over the ocean. Once we start this, there's no going back. Sarah sipped her coffee thoughtfully. Mom, do you remember when I was 12 and those older kids were bullying me at school? You came home crying every day for a month. And what did you tell me? I smiled, remembering. That bullies count on good people doing nothing. They win when decent people are too scared or too polite to fight back. Well, Sarah said, standing up and smoothing her hair, I'm done being polite. At 2:47 p.m., Brad's rental car pulled into Sarah's apartment complex. Frank's surveillance team was in position. Sarah was wired and ready, and I was stationed in my car across the street, watching my daughter walk into the arms of a killer. This was either the bravest thing we'd ever done or the stupidest. In about 30 minutes, we'd find out which. Through Frank's earpiece, I listened to Sarah open her apartment door. Brad. Her voice was perfectly calibrated, hurt but hopeful, angry but forgiving. Sarah, baby, I'm so sorry. His voice was exactly as I remembered, smooth, practiced, devastatingly sincere. I panicked. Your mother's questions, the pressure about finances, I've been hurt before, and I was terrified of being hurt again. The manipulation was masterful. He'd turned his criminal flight into vulnerability, his abandonment into self-protection. If I didn't know what I knew, I might have found it convincing myself. I missed you so much, Sarah said, and I heard genuine pain in her voice. Despite everything she'd learned about him, part of her had truly loved the man she thought he was. I missed you too. Every day, I kept thinking about our life together, our future, about the children we want to have. A pause. About building something beautiful with your family's resources. There it was, less than 5 minutes back, and he was already steering the conversation toward my money. Mom feels terrible about how she treated you, Sarah said, following our script. She wants to make things right. Your mother was just being protective. I understand that now. But Sarah, we need to move forward with our financial planning. I've been thinking about it while I was away, and I have some ideas. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Frank had warned us that Brad would likely move fast this time. He'd lost nearly a month and would be eager to complete his con before I had time to investigate further. What kind of ideas? Sarah asked. Well, your mother's property portfolio is impressive, but it's not diversified. All those coastal properties are vulnerable to market fluctuations, environmental regulations, climate change. She needs someone with investment expertise to help her restructure. The audacity was stunning. He was positioning himself as my financial savior while planning to rob me blind. I don't know much about investments, Sarah said, but that sounds complicated. Not complicated, just strategic. We could set up a management company, transfer the properties into a corporate structure for tax advantages. I know people who specialize in this type of wealth preservation. I bet he did. Frank had mentioned that Brandon Michelson typically worked with a network of criminals, fake lawyers, corrupt accountants, forged document specialists. Would Mom maintain control, Sarah asked. Of course, she'd be the primary beneficiary, but we'd be protecting her assets for the future, for our children's inheritance. Children. Our children. He was already claiming ownership of grandchildren who didn't exist, tying his fictional future to my real assets. Maybe we should all meet, Sarah suggested. Mom, you and me, to discuss this properly. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. Is she available tomorrow? Frank's voice crackled through my earpiece. He's moving too fast. This feels urgent to him, I whispered back. He knows I'm getting suspicious. He wants to close this deal before I dig deeper. Tomorrow might be too soon, Sarah was saying. She's been really upset about driving you away. She might need more time to... Sarah. Brad's voice had changed, becoming more intense. I need you to understand something, and your mother has over $30 million in assets, and she's vulnerable. A single woman her age, isolated, making emotional decisions. There are people who prey on situations like this. The projection was extraordinary. He was describing himself while positioning himself as her protector. What are you saying? I'm saying she needs family looking out for her. Professional guidance, legal protection. If we wait too long, if we let her make decisions while she's emotionally compromised, she could lose everything. You think someone would try to take advantage of her? Sarah, wealthy widows are targets. Con artists, financial predators, even family members who want to contest wills or manipulate inheritance decisions. We need to get ahead of this. I almost laughed. Brandon Michelson was warning my daughter about Brandon Michelson. You're scaring me, Sarah said, and she didn't have to fake the fear in her voice. I don't mean to scare you. I mean to protect you. To protect both of you, but we have to act decisively. There was a long pause. I could imagine Sarah appearing to consider his words, letting him think his urgency was working. Okay, she said finally. Let me call Mom tonight. I'll see if she can meet us tomorrow evening. Perfect. And Sarah? Don't mention the specifics of what we discussed. Just tell her I'm back, that we've reconciled, and that I'd like to apologize for my behavior. Why shouldn't I mention the investment ideas? Because she'll want to research them, maybe consult her own financial advisors. We don't need outside interference complicating things. Outside interference. He meant legitimate oversight that would expose his criminal intentions. Brad, Sarah said carefully, these are big decisions. Shouldn't Mom have professional advice? She'll have professional advice. Mine. Sarah, I have an MBA from Wharton, 15 years of experience in wealth management. I'm not some amateur trying to take advantage of your family. Except he wasn't Brad Mitchell with an MBA from Wharton. He was Brandon Michelson, a high school dropout with a criminal record spanning 3 states. Frank's voice buzzed in my ear again. We're getting good material. He's building a fraud case in real time. After Brad left Sarah's apartment, I drove home to prepare for tomorrow's meeting. This would be my performance of a lifetime, playing a vulnerable widow eager to trust her son-in-law while secretly recording every word of his criminal proposal. That evening, Sarah came to my house for our final strategy session. How did it feel? I asked. Seeing him again? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Like talking to a stranger wearing my husband's face. Everything he said, every gesture, every expression. I kept thinking about how calculated it all was. How he studied me to learn exactly how to manipulate me. Are you ready for tomorrow? She nodded. I want to hear him say it, Mom. I want to hear him admit that this was never about love. That I was just a mark, a way to get to your money. Honey, sociopaths don't admit things like that. They justify. They rationalize. They rewrite history to make themselves the hero. Then I want to hear his justifications. I want to understand how someone becomes that kind of monster. Sarah looked at me with eyes that had aged years in the past month. And then I want to watch him go to prison. Tomorrow would determine whether we were brilliant or foolish. Whether we'd catch a predator or become his next victims. Either way, it was too late to back out now. Brad arrived at my house carrying flowers and wearing his most charming smile. If I hadn't known what I knew, I might have been touched by the gesture. Instead, I felt sick watching him perform the role of the contrite son-in-law. Margaret, he said, embracing me warmly, I owe you a tremendous apology. No need, I replied, accepting the flowers graciously. I understand I came across as intrusive, a mother protecting her daughter, perhaps a bit too aggressively. You were doing what any good mother would do. I respect that. Sarah squeezed his hand, playing her part perfectly. I told Brad how terrible you felt about causing problems between us. I did feel terrible. I lied smoothly, gesturing for them to sit. I just want my daughter to be happy. We spent 15 minutes on pleasantries, his travels during our separation, how much he'd missed Sarah, his eagerness to rebuild our family relationship. I served wine and cheese, playing the gracious hostess while Frank's recording equipment captured every word. Finally, Brad steered the conversation where we all knew it was headed. Margaret, I hope you'll forgive my directness, but I've been thinking about your estate planning situation. Oh? Well, yes. As Sarah's husband, I feel a responsibility to help ensure her future security. And frankly, I'm concerned about some vulnerabilities in your current asset structure. I leaned forward with apparent interest. What kind of vulnerabilities? Brad pulled out a leather portfolio, props for his performance. Your real estate holdings are substantial, but they're not protected from potential legal challenges, tax liability changes, or market volatility. A single lawsuit, a regulatory change affecting coastal development, even a natural disaster could significantly impact the portfolio's value. His analysis was actually quite sophisticated. Whatever else Brandon Michelson was, he'd clearly educated himself about real estate investment. What would you recommend? I asked. A comprehensive restructuring. We'd establish a family-limited partnership, transfer the properties into a protective corporate entity, and implement sophisticated tax strategies that could save you millions in eventual estate taxes. Sarah spoke up. That sounds complicated. Would Mom lose control of her properties? Not at all, Brad assured her. Margaret would remain the managing partner with full decision-making authority, but we'd create legal protections that would shield the assets from future threats. What kind of threats? I asked. Brad's expression grew serious. Margaret, women in your position are targeted constantly. Financial advisors who charge excessive fees, distant relatives who might contest your will, even potential romantic partners who could manipulate you into poor decisions. The irony was breathtaking. He was describing his own criminal behavior while presenting himself as my protector from it. That's frightening, I said. How would this partnership structure protect me? By creating legal barriers between your personal vulnerability and your assets. The properties would be owned by the partnership, managed according to a formal operating agreement that couldn't be changed by emotional manipulation or coercion. But who would be my partners in this arrangement? Brad smiled. Family, of course. Sarah as your primary heir, and myself as someone with the expertise to help manage the investments professionally. There it was. He wanted to be my legal partner in a $30 million real estate empire. What percentage of partnership would each of us hold? I asked. Well, you'd maintain majority control, perhaps 60%. Sarah would have 35% as your heir, and I'd take a small management stake, maybe 5%, just enough to give me legal authority to implement protective strategies. 5% of $30 million was $1.5 million. Plus, as a managing partner, he'd likely arrange to pay himself substantial management fees. This is a big decision, I said thoughtfully. I'd need to consult with my attorneys. Of course. But Margaret, I'd recommend moving relatively quickly. The longer you wait, the more exposed you remain to potential threats. What kind of timeline are you thinking? Brad exchanged a glance with Sarah. Honestly, I'd like to see the paperwork completed within the next month. I have some contacts in estate planning who could expedite the legal work. I bet he did. Frank had explained that criminals like Brandon typically worked with networks of corrupt professionals who could create convincing fraudulent documents. A month seems fast, I said. The protection is worth the urgency, Brad insisted. Margaret, every day you delay is a day someone could target you. Every day your assets remain vulnerable. Sarah spoke up, right on cue. Mom, what Brad's saying makes sense. Daddy always said you were too trusting with financial matters. That was a lie. Thomas had often praised my business instincts, but it was exactly what Brad wanted to hear. Your father was wise, Brad said solemnly. He understood that wealth requires protection, not just accumulation. For the next hour, Brad outlined his vision for restructuring my estate. He spoke knowledgeably about tax strategies, liability protection, and investment diversification. If he really were a legitimate financial advisor, his suggestions might have been valuable. But he wasn't legitimate, and his real plan wasn't to protect my assets. It was to steal them. As the evening wound down, Brad made his closing pitch. Margaret, I want you to know that I view this as more than a business arrangement. I see it as my opportunity to honor Thomas's legacy by protecting what he built, to ensure that his hard work benefits not just you, but Sarah and your future grandchildren. I'm very moved by that sentiment, I replied. Then you'll move forward with the partnership structure? I paused, as if wrestling with the decision. I'll need a few days to think it over, and I'd like to review the specific documents before signing anything. Of course. But Margaret, Brad's voice carried just a hint of urgency. Please don't delay too long. Time isn't on our side when it comes to asset protection. After they left, I sat in my living room, staring at the flowers Brad had brought. Tomorrow, Frank would turn our recordings over to the FBI. Brandon Michelson had just spent 3 hours detailing his plan to defraud a widow out of $30 million. But something was nagging at me. Brad had been too smooth, too prepared, almost as if he knew he was being recorded and wanted to create evidence of legitimate financial planning rather than criminal intent. What if we weren't setting a trap for him? What if he was setting a trap for us? The next morning, Frank's phone call confirmed my worst fears. Margaret, we have a problem. I ran our recordings past my FBI contact, and he's concerned that Brad's statements were too clean, too legally defensible. He talked about asset protection and estate planning, but never explicitly mentioned fraud or theft. I paced my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear. So we didn't get him? Worse than that. My contact thinks Brad might have known he was being recorded. Everything he said could be interpreted as legitimate financial advice. My blood ran cold. How would he know? Professional criminals learn to spot surveillance. The way he positioned himself away from Sarah during certain conversations, how he kept his voice modulated, the careful language he used, it all suggests awareness. What does this mean for Sarah? Frank's pause stretched too long. It means she might be in real danger. If Brad knows we're on to him, if he realizes Sarah's working with us, he might accelerate his timeline. I was about to respond when I heard my front door slam. Sarah burst into my kitchen, her face pale with terror. "Mom," she gasped. "Brad's gone. His car's not at my apartment, his clothes are missing, and he left this." She handed me a note written in Brad's neat handwriting. "Sarah, I know what you and your mother are planning. You should have trusted me instead of betraying me. This isn't over. Brad." Frank's voice crackled through the phone. "What's happening there?" "He's figured it out," I told Frank. "He's disappeared again, but this time he's angry." "Pack a bag," Frank ordered. "Both of you. Come to my office immediately. If Brandon feels cornered, he's going to react, and cornered predators are the most dangerous kind." An hour later, we sat in Frank's office while he coordinated with federal agents. The plan had backfired spectacularly. Instead of gathering evidence to arrest Brad, we'd revealed our hand and lost the element of surprise. "The problem," explained Agent Rebecca Martinez from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, "is that Brandon Michelson is exceptionally good at disappearing when things get hot. We've been chasing him for 3 years, and every time we get close, he vanishes." "But he threatened us," Sarah protested. "Doesn't that count for something?" "A vague note about 'this isn't over' isn't a credible threat under the law. And he didn't actually commit fraud. He just discussed investment strategies." I felt the familiar burn of injustice. Once again, a man who'd hurt my family was going to escape consequences. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now we wait," Agent Martinez said. "We'll monitor your finances, watch for any attempts to access your accounts or forge documents, but unless he makes another move, he gets away with it," Sarah finished bitterly. That evening, Sarah stayed at my house again. We sat on my deck overlooking the ocean, both lost in thought. "I'm sorry, Mom," Sarah said finally. "This was my idea, and now he's angry, and we're no closer to stopping him." "Don't apologize. We tried to do the right thing. But now he knows we're aware of who he is. What if he comes after us for revenge?" I didn't answer because I was wondering the same thing. Brandon Michelson had built his career on targeting vulnerable women. How would he respond to women who'd tried to trap him? My phone rang at 11:47 p.m. Unknown number. "Hello?" "Hello, Margaret." Brad's voice was calm, almost pleasant. "I think we need to talk. I'm not going to meet with you. Brad, or Brandon, or whatever your real name is." His laugh was soft, almost fond. "Oh, Margaret, you hired a private investigator, didn't you? Clever woman. I should have given you more credit." Sarah was frantically gesturing for me to hang up, but something in Brad's tone kept me on the line. "What do you want?" "I want to explain something you don't understand. Something your investigator didn't tell you because he doesn't know the whole story. I know enough. Do you? Did Frank Romano tell you why I left Phoenix so suddenly 2 years ago?" I glanced at Sarah. Frank had mentioned Phoenix, but not the specific circumstances of Brad's departure. "I'm listening. There was a woman, Victoria Chen, wealthy widow, lonely, looking for companionship. Beautiful woman, actually. Reminded me a bit of you. Did you kill her?" The question came out before I could stop it. "Kill her?" Brad sounded genuinely surprised. "Margaret, I've never killed anyone. That's not what I do." "Then what happened to your first wife?" "Carmen? She's alive and well, living in Seattle under her maiden name. We divorced, she got half my assets, and we both moved on. Messily, but legally." I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. But Frank said what he thought was true based on incomplete information. "Let me tell you what really happened in Phoenix." Despite every instinct screaming at me to hang up, I found myself listening. Victoria and I had a relationship. She helped me with some investments, and yes, I gained access to her accounts. But Margaret, she knew exactly what was happening. She was a willing participant. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Victoria was 73 years old, sharp as a tack, with a Harvard MBA. "You think I could have fooled someone like that if she didn't want to be fooled?" Sarah was shaking her head violently, but something in Brad's voice made me continue listening. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that wealthy widows get lonely, Margaret. They get tired of their children treating them like fragile, helpless creatures. They want adventure, excitement. someone who sees them as vibrant women instead of aging mothers. So you provided that? I provided companionship, romance, and yes, financial excitement. Victoria knew I was using her money for high-risk investments. She also knew she might lose it. But for 18 months, she felt alive again. And when she lost everything, she didn't lose everything. She lost $2 million, which represented about 15% of her total wealth. Her children discovered our relationship, threatened to have her declared incompetent, and convinced her to press charges against me. I sank into my chair. This wasn't the story Frank had told me. Why are you telling me this? Because I think you and I might have more in common than you realize. Because I think you might be as tired of being treated like a helpless elderly woman as Victoria was. I'm not helpless. No, you're not. You hired a PI, set up surveillance, recorded our conversations. That's not the behavior of a helpless woman. That's the behavior of someone who takes control of her own life. Brad, what do you want from me? I want to make you an offer. A real one, not the nonsense I was performing for your daughter's benefit yesterday. Sarah was gesturing frantically for me to hang up, but I couldn't. Not yet. What kind of offer? Partnership. Real partnership. You have $30 million in assets that are currently generating minimal returns. I have expertise in high-yield investments and international markets. We could double your wealth in 2 years. Or I could lose it all. You could. But Margaret, what's the alternative? Sitting on your properties until you die, leaving them to a daughter who's already planning how to spend her inheritance? The accuracy of that observation stung. Sarah had mentioned several times how she'd use the property money to travel, to pay off her student loans, to buy a bigger house. I need to think about this. Of course you do. But think about this too. Your daughter set up an elaborate scheme to entrap me. She wore a wire, lied to my face, betrayed the most intimate relationship in her life. What does that tell you about her character? I looked at Sarah, who was staring at me with growing alarm. She was protecting me. Was she? Or was she protecting her inheritance? Margaret, if you died tomorrow, who benefits most from my absence? The line went dead. Sarah grabbed my arm. Mom, please tell me you're not believing anything he said. I don't know what to believe anymore. He's manipulating you. This is exactly what he does. He plants seeds of doubt, makes you question the people who actually care about you. But as I looked at my daughter, I found myself wondering, when exactly had she started caring more about my money than my happiness? Agent Martinez arrived within 30 minutes of my call, but her news wasn't encouraging. We traced the call to a prepaid phone that's already been ditched. Brandon's covering his tracks well. What about what he said? I asked. About Victoria Chen. About not killing anyone? Martinez exchanged a glance with Frank Romeo. We've been investigating those claims. It's complicated. Complicated how? Frank spoke up reluctantly. Some of what he told you appears to be true. Victoria Chen is alive. She did initially defend Brad when charges were filed. Her children did pressure her to press charges. I felt Sarah's hand grip mine tighter. But, Agent Martinez continued, that doesn't make him innocent. Financial elder abuse often involves a manipulation so sophisticated that victims defend their abusers. Victoria Chen lost $2 million to highly speculative investments that Brad controlled. She was a Harvard MBA, I pointed out. Surely she understood the risks. She was also a lonely 73-year-old woman who'd recently lost her husband, Martinez replied firmly. Predators target emotional vulnerability, not just financial assets. Sarah finally spoke up. Mom, he's in your head. That's what he does. He makes you doubt reality. Doubt the people trying to protect you. I'm not doubting reality, I snapped, then immediately felt bad for my tone. I'm just trying to understand what's actually happening here. My phone rang again. Same unknown number. Don't answer it, Sarah pleaded, but I was already pressing accept. Hello, Brad. Margaret, I want you to look up the address I'm about to give you. 1247 Ocean View Drive, Carmel. Don't just look it up. Drive there. Tonight. Why would I do that? Because it's one of your properties. And because Victoria Chen is there, waiting to tell you her side of the story. The line went dead. Agent Martinez was already on her radio, calling for backup units to be dispatched to Carmel. Frank was pulling up property records on his computer. It's legitimate, Frank confirmed. 1247 Ocean View Drive is one of Thomas's properties, currently vacant, listed as a vacation rental. This is obviously a trap, Sarah said. He's luring you to an isolated location. Maybe, I agreed. Or maybe he's telling the truth about Victoria Chen. Mom, even if she is there, even if she is alive, that doesn't mean Brad isn't dangerous. Agent Martinez finished her radio call. We'll have units positioned around the property within 40 minutes. If you insist on going, we'll provide escort and surveillance. I'm going, I decided. Then I'm going with you, Sarah said immediately. No. My voice was firmer than I'd intended. Sarah, if this is dangerous, I won't put you at risk. And if it's not dangerous, if Victoria Chen really is there with information that changes everything, then I need to hear it without your emotional investment in the outcome. My emotional investment? Mom, I'm trying to protect you. I know you are. But you're also protecting your inheritance, and I need to understand where one ends and the other begins. The hurt in Sarah's eyes was like a physical blow. But I didn't take it back, because somewhere in the past 24 hours, I'd started wondering if Brad might be right about my daughter's motivations. The drive to Carmel took 90 minutes, with Agent Martinez in the passenger seat and FBI surveillance vehicles maintaining discreet distances behind us. The property was a beautiful 3-bedroom house perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, worth approximately $4 million. Brad's rental car was in the driveway. A second car I didn't recognize sat beside it. Margaret. Brad emerged from the house as we pulled up, his hands visible and empty. Thank you for coming. Agent Martinez had her weapon ready, but not drawn. Mr. Mitchell, I need you to stay where you are. Of course. Brad's voice was calm, respectful. Agent, there's someone inside who's been waiting to meet Mrs. Sullivan. With your permission, I'd like to invite her in. Not happening? Then perhaps the lady could come outside. A moment later, an elegant woman with silver hair emerged from the house. She was impeccably dressed, carried herself with confidence, and looked nothing like a victim. You must be Margaret, she said, extending her hand. I'm Victoria Chen, and I think you and I need to have a very honest conversation about Brandon Michelson. Victoria Chen was not what I expected. At 75, she was vibrant, articulate, and clearly in command of her faculties. She spoke to Agent Martinez with the confidence of someone accustomed to dealing with authority figures. Agent, I understand your concerns, but I'm here voluntarily. Mr. Michelson contacted me because he felt Mrs. Sullivan deserved to hear the complete truth about our relationship. We sat in the house's living room, while FBI agents positioned themselves strategically around the property. Victoria Chen told her story with businesslike precision. I met Brandon 2 years ago at a charity fundraiser in Phoenix. I was recently widowed, lonely, and frankly bored with the limitations everyone expected me to accept. My children wanted me to sell my house, move to a retirement community, spend my days playing bridge and watching television. How did your relationship with Brad develop? I asked, slowly, carefully. He was charming, yes, but he was also intelligent and knowledgeable about investments. When he suggested some alternative investment strategies, I was intrigued. You knew he was using your money for high-risk investments? Margaret, I have a Harvard MBA and 40 years of business experience. Of course I knew. I also knew I might lose money, but I was making my own choices about my own assets. Agent Martinez leaned forward. Miss Chen, you lost $2 million. I invested $2 million in high-risk, high-reward opportunities, Victoria corrected. Some of those investments failed. Others succeeded spectacularly. What do you mean? I asked. Victoria smiled. What I mean is that while I lost $2 million on some investments, I gained $3.2 million on others. My overall portfolio increased by $1.2 million during my relationship with Brandon. The silence that followed was deafening. But the charges, Agent Martinez began, were filed under pressure from my children, who were horrified that their elderly mother was taking financial risks without their permission. They convinced me that Brandon had manipulated me, that I was a victim of elder abuse. And now I've had 2 years to reflect on what really happened. And I've realized that the most manipulative people in my life weren't the man who treated me as a competent adult, but the children who couldn't accept that their mother was capable of making her own decisions. I felt the world shifting beneath my feet again. Victoria, Are you saying Brad never defrauded you? I'm saying that Brandon offered me partnership in investment opportunities that I chose to accept. I made more money than I lost, but more importantly, I felt alive and in control of my own life for the first time since my husband died. Brad spoke for the first time since we'd entered the house. Margaret, I want to be completely honest with you. I'm not a traditional financial advisor. I don't work for banks or investment firms. I work independently, often with clients who want alternatives to conservative, low-yield portfolios. What are you saying? I'm saying that everything your investigator told you about my criminal history is technically accurate. I have been investigated for financial crimes. I have been accused of elder abuse. But I've never been convicted of anything because I've never actually committed fraud. Agent Martinez was taking notes furiously. Mr. Michelson, are you claiming that all your previous relationships were consensual business partnerships? I'm claiming that wealthy older women are often much more sophisticated and capable than their families give them credit for. I'm claiming that some people are willing to take risks for the possibility of significant returns, both financial and personal. Victoria nodded. Margaret, let me ask you something. How has your family treated you since your husband died? Have they consulted you about major decisions? Have they assumed you needed protection from the world? Have they made you feel like your primary value is the inheritance you'll leave behind? The questions hit like physical blows because they were so accurate. My daughter loves me, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. I'm sure she does, but love and respect aren't the same thing. Does she respect your judgment? Your autonomy? Your right to take risks with your own life and money? I thought about Sarah's reaction to Brad, her immediate assumption that I needed protection. I thought about the way she'd discussed my properties as her inheritance. I thought about how quickly she'd agreed to set up surveillance without considering that I might be capable of handling the situation myself. What exactly are you proposing? I asked Brad. A genuine partnership. You provide capital, I provide expertise and access to opportunities your traditional advisors would never recommend. We split profits according to a predetermined formula. You maintain control of your primary residence and enough liquid assets to ensure your security. And the personal relationship? Brad glanced at Victoria, who smiled encouragingly. Margaret, I won't lie to you. I find you attractive and interesting. But romance isn't part of the business arrangement. If something personal develops between us, it develops naturally, without financial pressure. I looked at Agent Martinez. Is this legal? She closed her notebook reluctantly. If both parties are competent adults entering into a voluntary business arrangement with full disclosure of risks, then yes, it's legal. Even though the FBI has been investigating him, we investigate lots of people we never charge. Investigation doesn't imply guilt. Victoria stood up. Margaret, I'm returning to Phoenix tomorrow, but I want you to have my contact information. If you decide to work with Brandon, I'd be happy to serve as a reference, or just as someone who understands what it's like to be treated as incapable by people who claim to love you. As we prepared to leave, Brad handed me a business card with only a phone number. Think about it, Margaret, but don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't wait for family approval. The drive back to Monterey was silent. Agent Martinez seemed lost in thought, and I was processing everything I'd heard. Finally, she spoke. Mrs. Sullivan, I have to ask, are you seriously considering this? I don't know, I answered honestly, but I'm definitely considering the possibility that everyone else has been making decisions for me instead of with me. Sarah was waiting in my driveway when we returned, her face tight with anxiety and anger. How could you go there without me? She demanded, before I'd even gotten out of the car. How could you put yourself in danger like that? I wasn't in danger. You met with a criminal at an isolated location. Mom, what were you thinking? Agent Martinez intervened. Miss Sullivan, your mother was under FBI protection the entire time. And I have to tell you, the meeting raised some interesting questions about Mr. Michelson's actual criminal status. What do you mean? I explained about Victoria Chen, about her voluntary participation in high-risk investments, about her financial gains rather than losses. Sarah's expression grew increasingly incredulous. Mom, you're not seriously believing this. I'm seriously questioning what I believe about a lot of things. They're manipulating you. Can't you see that? This whole thing with Victoria Chen is probably an elaborate setup. Sarah. Agent Martinez verified Victoria's identity. She spoke with the Phoenix Police Department. Everything Victoria told us checks out. Sarah turned to Agent Martinez desperately. You can't let her do this. You can't let this criminal target my mother. Miss Sullivan, I can't stop competent adults from making their own financial decisions, even if I think those decisions are unwise. She's not competent. She's grieving. She's lonely. She's being manipulated. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah realized what she'd said and clapped her hand over her mouth, but it was too late. I'm not competent? I asked quietly. Mom, I didn't mean… Yes, you did. And that's exactly what Victoria Chen's children said about her. That's exactly what Brad warned me you'd say if I didn't do what you wanted. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Mom, please, I'm trying to protect you. No, Sarah, you're trying to control me. There's a difference. I walked into my house, leaving Sarah standing in the driveway. Inside, I poured myself a large glass of wine and sat on my deck, watching the sunset over the ocean. My phone buzzed with a text from Brad. I'm flying to Hong Kong tomorrow for an investment meeting. If you're interested in joining me as a partner, let me know by midnight. Otherwise, I'll assume you've decided to play it safe. Hong Kong, the other side of the world, other side of… far from FBI surveillance and family interference. At 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes before Brad's deadline, I made my decision. I texted back, I'll be ready in the morning. Then I called my attorney and arranged for a power of attorney document that would allow Sarah to handle my affairs if something happened to me. Not because I thought anything would happen, but because I finally understood the difference between reasonable precaution and paralyzing fear. At 6 a.m., a black sedan picked me up. Brad was in the passenger seat, looking elegant in a tailored suit. Are you sure about this, Margaret? I'm sure about taking control of my own life, I replied. Everything else we'll figure out as we go. As we drove to the airport, I thought about Sarah, probably just waking up to discover I was gone. I thought about Agent Martinez, who would be frustrated but ultimately accepting. I thought about my comfortable, predictable, safe life that had been slowly suffocating me. And I thought about Victoria Chen's question. Did the people who claimed to love me actually respect me? The answer, I realized, was no. But maybe that was about to change. 3 months later, I returned from Asia with a portfolio worth $42 million and a deep tan from our weekend in Thailand. Sarah met me at the airport, her face a mixture of relief and reproach. I was terrified something had happened to you, she said, hugging me tightly. Something did happen to me, I replied. I remembered who I used to be before everyone decided I was too old and fragile to live my own life. Brad and I weren't romantic partners. We were business partners who discovered we made an excellent team. He had the expertise and connections. I had the capital and business judgment. Together, we'd created something neither of us could have achieved alone. I still don't trust him, Sarah said as we drove home. You don't have to trust him, I replied. You just have to trust me. And for the first time in years, I trusted myself completely. I'd taken the biggest risk of my life, and I'd won. Not just financially, but personally. I'd won back my right to make my own choices, my own mistakes, and my own successes. At 68, I'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. The only person who needs to approve of your life is you. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.